Hi, I'm Michael McPadden from the Tango API team, back again to show you more about Tango's Mobile Procurement REST API, also known as MobProc for short. In this video, I'll be explaining how to obtain order properties that need to be passed when submitting an order request. But before I do, I just want to explain a few things about them. Order properties, also known as checkout fields, are not required by Tango, but rather they are additional pieces of information about an order that are used by a third-party vendor to fulfill that order. Furthermore, you should note that they are typically required for all order transaction types, not just new activation orders. For example, they can include such information as a contact number, additional instructions, or, as in the case of a suspend order, a preferred suspension date. Although some of them are optional, some are required by the vendor. These order properties must be populated in order for the order request to be accepted. So how do we know which specific order properties are supported for your order request? Well, you can use the orders/properties endpoint to get a list of relevant order properties. But in order to return that list, the API needs to know two things: a transaction type and a vendor ID. It is important to understand that not only do order properties vary by transaction type, but they vary by vendor as well. In other words, properties available for a new activation will be very different from those that are required for a deactivation order. And furthermore, properties available for a deactivation order for a carrier such as AT&T can differ somewhat from those supported by Verizon Wireless or Vodafone. Therefore, both these IDs are necessary to return the relevant set of properties. I'd like to quickly explain what is returned in the response. There are four pieces of information that are returned with every individual order property. First is an ID, which is the unique ID identifying that specific order property. A label, which is a description that is suitable for displaying to an end user. A type, this indicates the data type to which the value should be set. The three valid options are text, date, and choice. I'll explain the choice option in a minute. And validation, this indicates if the property is required by the vendor or if it's optional. As I said, these four will always be returned, but there are some optional properties that can also be returned when appropriate. They are max length, which is the maximum number of characters to which the property's value can be set, min length, the minimum number of characters, and there's also a min date and max date for the date type properties, pattern, which is the pattern that the value should match, for example, month, day, year, year, and this pattern can be displayed as a hint for the end user, and regex, which is a regular expression pattern that can be used to validate the value. You might notice that there is one other property that is included within the response, and that's group ID. One or more instances of the group ID property can be found within a single response. As you may have guessed, that is used to gather clusters of related properties into a group. Although most often you will probably only see one single group, it is possible for the backend source system to return order properties in multiple groups. In such case, they will simply cluster related order properties into a field array and provide it a unique ID. API consumers can use all of this response data in a variety of ways. One way is to surface the order property options in a user interface, such as a form, so that the user can then enter the values for each of them. Now, before we go to the demo, I just want to note that for the type property, we said there was three data type options supported: text, date, and choice. Text and date are self-explanatory, but I just want to give you a little more explanation about choice. The choice type is used to model properties that only accept a value from a defined list of options. Probably the most common use case for it is surfacing these options inside a user interface as a drop-down list. In addition to the four pieces of data found within all order properties, that is ID, label, type, and validation, a choice property also includes an array called choices. This array contains the options that can be selected for this particular order property's value. Each of the options in this array contains three properties: an ID, which is the unique ID for that specific choice option, the label, again a description that is suitable for displaying to your end user, and an isOther, which is a Boolean indicating whether or not this specific option represents a none of the above or other choice. There can only be one option in the array where isOther is set to true. This other or none of the above option is very helpful. API consumers can use it in a user interface to trigger another event, such as revealing a text field in which the end user can type in free-form text describing some selection that is different than the choices offered. Okay, now let's see those order properties in action by calling an endpoint in the developer portal. Here's the orders/properties endpoint, and I've just entered my authentication information. I will enter my tenant ID header as well as my client ID. Okay, here's where we need to enter our query parameters. As we discussed earlier, we know that order properties are dependent on transaction type and vendor. For transaction type, I'll select suspend. To indicate vendor, there are two options. I can simply enter in a vendor ID in the vendor field. In this case, I'll enter in 98, which is the ID for Verizon Wireless. Or if I didn't know the vendor ID, I could enter a service asset ID instead in the service field. Using this ID, the backend source system would be able to look up the service asset and determine the vendor ID from that. Okay, now I'll click Get. Okay, now let's view the response. Notice the data that is returned for each order property. We have the ID, the label, the max length, and the min length. Text, this is the value to which the property is defaulted. If the type was equal to date, we wouldn't see a text property, but rather we would see a date property instead. Type and validation, which is set to required or optional. If you look at the preferred suspension date, we can see some minor differences. Notice the min date, which is the earliest date to which the property can be set, and regex, which contains a regular expression pattern that is suitable for validation purposes. Unlike some of the text type order properties, this date type property does not have a default value. If it did, you would see a date property in it rather than a text property, as we saw set the default value for our text type order properties like contact number. Also, notice the hold service order property. This is a choice type property, and as such, it has a choices array containing two acceptable choices. Also, notice the is other property. Neither choice is an other or none of the above option, but if one was, it would be set to true. So that's what you need to know about order properties, the additional piece of information that are used by a third party to fulfill an order. Each transaction type supports a different set of order properties. Furthermore, even if the transaction type is the same, the order properties can vary somewhat by vendor. Therefore, both transaction type and vendor must be identified when calling the orders/properties endpoint. To identify the vendor, you must use the query parameter to pass either the vendor ID directly, or you can use the service ID, and the backend source system will do the necessary lookups to determine the vendor. You may also be interested in watching other Tango API videos that show how order properties are used in placing an order, including the one entitled How to Order a New Device and Service Plan, or perhaps the one entitled How to Create an Update Features Order Request. I hope you found this video useful. For more information and tutorials on other topics, we recommend browsing the ModProc API video library at modproc.tv and our documentation website at modproc.info. That's all for now. Thanks for watching and have a great day.